It was supposed to be just another Wednesday. The kind of day where the hallways of Lincoln High smelled like overcooked cafeteria tater tots and industrial-grade floor wax. The kind of day where the teachers droned on about Civil War battles without flinching, and students counted down the hours until they could escape into headphones and halftime dreams. But for 17-year-old Micah Davis, that Wednesday didn't just shift the course of his day, it detonated the ground beneath his future. Micah sat in the third row of Mr. Calhoun's U.S. history class, slouched just enough to be defiant but not enough to get called out. He was wearing the same hoodie he wore almost every day, navy blue with a faded NASA patch over the heart. His notebook was open, half full with small, sharp notes in pencil. He didn't talk much in class, but when he did, people listened. Not because he was loud. Because he was surgical. That morning, Mr. Calhoun stood in front of the whiteboard, marker squeaking out another lesson on Reconstruction, talking about how the South was economically devastated, and how the North imposed harsh conditions. Micah's pencil stopped mid-sentence. So, we're just skipping the part where black people were basically re-enslaved through sharecropping and Jim Crow laws. His voice was calm. Too calm. A few heads turned. Some smirked. Others froze. Mr. Calhoun's jaw tightened. Micah, this is a high school curriculum, not a political debate forum. Micah leaned back, unblinking. History is political. Especially when you edit it like this. The air went still. I think you need to be careful about the tone you're using, Mr. Calhoun said slowly. And if you have questions, bring them up after class. Nah, Micah said, shaking his head. I think we should all be asking why this textbook talks more about Southern Railroad damage than the millions of black people who got promised 40 acres and a mule, and got nothing. That was it. Mr. Calhoun's face flushed red. That's enough. Go to the office. And just like that, Micah stood up, gathered his things, and walked out. He didn't slam the door. He didn't say another word. But his silence screamed. The hallway outside was empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like an angry hive. He passed trophy cases full of victories he never cared about, school slogans painted in peeling letters, respect. Responsibility. Resilience. He almost laughed. He had barely made it to the front office when the assistant principal, Ms. Turner, stepped out with a paper in hand and a tight smile. We've decided to suspend you for insubordination, Micah. This isn't your first time disrupting instruction. Disrupting? Micah blinked. I asked a question. Ms. Turner didn't flinch. You challenged the teacher. That's not your place. Micah stared at her, then looked at the paper. 3 days. No appeal. By the time he stepped outside, a storm had rolled in. The sky was bruised and heavy. Rain hit the sidewalk like scattered marbles. He didn't have an umbrella. Just his hoodie, pulled up tight as he walked through the gates that slammed shut behind him. He didn't cry. He didn't curse. He just walked. Hands in his pockets. Eyes straight ahead. Atlanta felt louder when you didn't belong anywhere. His mom was still at work when he got home. She wouldn't be back until 7, maybe later if the nursing home was short-staffed again. He thought about calling her. He didn't. Not yet. Micah tossed his backpack on the floor of the tiny apartment they shared in Edgewood, kicked off his shoes, and collapsed onto the couch. Rain pattered against the window. The only sound in the room. He grabbed his laptop from the coffee table and opened it. Not to scroll TikTok. Not to play games. But to build. Micah wasn't just smart. He was brilliant in a way that made people uncomfortable. Self-taught coder. Obsessive about neural networks and ethical AI. He didn't brag about it. But in the quiet of this one-bedroom apartment, surrounded by notes and algorithms scribbled on old receipt paper and napkins, Micah was building something no one expected from a kid with a 2.8 GPA and a file marked, behavioral issue. As his screen lit up, so did a fire inside him. They wanted him quiet. They wanted him to fall in line. Then they really didn't understand him at all. Later that night, when his mom finally came home, soaked from the rain and exhausted, she found Micah still awake, still typing. "Micah," she said softly, kicking off her shoes. "What happened at school?" He looked at her, his eyes tired but sharp. "They suspended me." "For what?" "For not lying," he said. She closed her eyes, rubbed her forehead. "Lord, give me strength." He expected anger. Instead, she sat beside him on the couch and took his hand. "I know this world doesn't always make room for boys like you," she said quietly. "But don't you let that stop you from becoming the man you're meant to be." He nodded. For the first time that day, the lump in his throat almost broke him. But he swallowed it down. The next morning, he woke up to a flood of group chats, DMs, and a new hashtag trending locally, #MicahWasRight. Apparently, someone had recorded the classroom exchange and posted it on TikTok. The video hit a nerve. Comments poured in. "This kid is speaking the truth they don't want us to hear. Lincoln High failed him, not the other way around. This is why we need to change how we teach history." But with the support came the trolls. "Another punk kid who thinks he knows better than teachers. Race baiter. Expel him permanently." Micah scrolled through them all in silence. Then he shut the laptop and looked out the window. The rain had stopped. But something else had started. He didn't know it yet, but that video would be the first domino. The beginning of a chain reaction that would take him places textbooks never mentioned, and schools never prepared him for. And to the people who told him to sit down and stay silent, this story. This was the day Micah Davis stood up. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before the viral video. Before the suspension. Before the storm. Micah Davis was just a kid who asked too many questions. His earliest memory wasn't of a birthday party or a scraped knee, it was sitting in a cracked pleather chair in a tiny living room, watching his grandma underline verses in a leather Bible and whisper, "Ask, and it shall be given you, seek, and ye shall find." She said it with the kind of certainty that could hold up a house. Micah's mother, Janelle Davis, worked double shifts at the nursing home on Memorial Drive. She had Micah when she was 20, alone, terrified, and barely scraping by. His father left before Micah's first tooth came in, no explanations, no postcards, just a name that collected dust like unpaid bills. They lived with Grandma Thelma until she passed, and even after, Micah kept her words like pocket change: ask, seek, knock. He started reading early. Like, weirdly early. By age 5, he was correcting the preacher at church about who really built the ark. At 7, he was rearranging the family router settings so they could get faster internet. By 9, he had memorized every bone in the human body because he wanted to be a doctor, until he found out doctors had to follow strict rules about who they could help first in a triage line. That didn't sit right. At 10, he taught himself Python. By 12, he'd built a basic chatbot using open-source code and named it Theo, after his grandma. Theo didn't talk much, but he always listened. Micah didn't fit in at school. Teachers called him gifted in one breath and disruptive in the next. He asked too many questions about grading systems, about the difference between suspension and expulsion, about why some kids got away with throwing pencils while others got sent home for attitude. "Don't get yourself labeled," his mom warned once, while folding his laundry late at night. Micah had looked up. What if I already am? There was a weight to being a smart black kid in a public school. It wasn't just the pressure to succeed, it was the fear that if you spoke too clearly, too confidently, or too critically, people would stop seeing you as bright and start seeing you as threatening. By sophomore year, Micah had stopped raising his hand. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was tired of being punished for knowing it. Still, the world inside his head stayed bright. He saw patterns in everything: music, math, movement. He loved algorithms, not just because they solved problems, but because they were honest. No favoritism. No tone policing. Just logic. At night, while his classmates posted selfies and played video games, Micah wrote code and watched YouTube lectures from MIT. He took notes in old notebooks he found in thrift shops, pages already half filled with someone else's dreams. He didn't mind. There was something poetic about building a future on top of a stranger's discarded plans. Then there were the dreams. Not the sleepy kind, the big ones. He wanted to create something that would outlive him. Not an app. Not a website. A system. A whole ecosystem that helped kids like him, too curious for the box, too bold for the hallway pass, to find a way through the noise. He didn't tell anyone that. Not even his mom. But late at night, with only the hum of a desk fan and the flicker of code on a cracked screen, he imagined a world where no one had to shrink to survive. Micah's only real break from the grind was his walks. On weekends, he'd throw on a hoodie and walk to the little park off Flat Shoals. He didn't bring headphones. He wanted to hear Atlanta breathe. The rumble of trains in the distance, the preacher with the mic on the corner, the kids playing tag on cracked pavement. Every block told a story. Every face carried a lesson. That's where he met Ava. She was sketching on a bench, black boots propped up, headphones in but not playing anything. She drew like she was fighting something. Like every stroke of the pencil was keeping the world from falling apart. "You always draw in pen?" Micah asked, nodding toward her sketchpad. She looked up, one eyebrow raised. "You always talk to strangers. Only the ones who aren't trying to be invisible." That got a smirk out of her. They didn't talk about school. They didn't talk about trauma. They talked about ideas. About how art and code were just two sides of the same rebellion. Ava taught him how to see people in lines and shadows. Micah showed her how algorithms could create empathy, not just efficiency. They never called it friendship. It didn't need a name. Then came junior year. The new principal. The new rules. Micah noticed how they cracked down on tone. How they told kids not to challenge teachers in front of the class. How the curriculum shifted just enough to feel sanitized. How suddenly, asking why became acting out. Micah started keeping notes. Not just in his mind, but in a shared doc with Ava titled, "What They Don't Want Us to Know." It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. They weren't just shaping students. They were shaping silence. And Micah had never been good at being quiet. When the suspension hit, it didn't feel like a punishment, it felt like confirmation. Like everything he feared was true. His mom cried that night. Not loud. Not for long. But he heard her. "I just wanted you to make it through," she whispered. Micah stared at the ceiling. "What's the point of making it through if you gotta leave half of yourself behind?" She didn't answer. But in the quiet that followed, something settled. Not peace. Not quite. More like purpose. The next day, he got a message. A name he didn't recognize. No profile pic. No mutuals. "I saw your video. You're not wrong. Keep going. They're just scared of what you represent." No signature. Micah stared at it for a long time. He didn't know it yet, but that message came from someone who would soon change the entire course of his journey. But that's another storm. For now, Micah sat at his desk, opened a new file, and typed a single line of code. Def question_everything. Because asking was how it all began. And asking was how it would all be rebuilt. The Monday after his suspension, the halls of Lincoln High buzzed without him. Some students whispered his name like it was a punchline. Others, like it was a prayer. But Micah Davis? He was across town, sitting at a wobbly table in the Edgewood Public Library, notebook open, laptop charging off a wall socket with a loose cover that sparked if you plugged in too fast. 3 days of suspension felt like an eternity, but not because he missed school. He didn't. What he missed was structure. The rhythm. The chessboard where he could play his quiet games of disruption. Now, he had to create his own. Ava had brought him a sandwich and a USB drive the night before. It's got that documentary on redlining you wanted. And a file I found on school-to-prison pipelines, she said, slipping it into his palm like a secret. You always come through, he said. Somebody's gotta, she replied. They won't. Micah stayed up late watching footage of board meetings where parents begged for better resources, only to be met with polite nods and budget excuses. He saw the maps, how neighborhoods were drawn like traps. How zip codes dictated futures. And he couldn't stop thinking, what if the system wasn't broken at all? What if it was working exactly the way it was designed to? Back at school, Miss Turner called a staff meeting about disciplinary thresholds. She stood at the front of the faculty lounge with a tight smile and a PowerPoint titled, Maintaining Academic Focus Through Behavioral Accountability. Translation, Silence the Disruptors. Some of our students are mistaking curiosity for confrontation, she said, eyes skimming the room. We need to reinforce that questions are welcome, but only when asked appropriately. Mr. Calhoun nodded. So did most of the staff. Except for one, Ms. Ramirez. She was a literature teacher with thick curls, a dry wit, and a coffee mug that read, Books Before Bias. She'd taught Micah in 10th grade and remembered every paper he submitted, especially the one comparing Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man to real-life public education. Micah Davis didn't raise his voice, she said, interrupting the meeting. He raised a point. Silence. Ms. Turner tightened her jaw. He disrespected a teacher. He challenged a narrative, Ms. Ramirez shot back. There's a difference. But the room didn't want differences. It wanted order. Uniformity. Quiet. So, like usual, the one voice of dissent was outvoted by a room full of caution. Meanwhile, Micah wasn't waiting for validation. He was building. Every morning, he showed up to the library with a backpack full of books and a laptop full of code. He wasn't just learning, he was creating. He started writing algorithms that could simplify difficult textbook language for younger readers. Then added voice-to-text functions for students with dyslexia. He called it a side project, but Ava called it what it really was, the beginning of something revolutionary. You realize you're building a better classroom, right? She said, watching him string lines of code together like poetry. He shrugged. I'm just trying to make something I wish I had. Ava leaned in. Micah. That's what every great inventor does. That night, he posted a short clip of his tool in action. A screen recording of his interface reading history passages aloud in a clear, rhythmic voice, then breaking down the text into simple questions. He captioned it. If the schools won't teach us in a way we can learn, maybe we teach ourselves. No hashtags. No tags. Just a truth. By morning, it had been shared over 3,000 times. But attention came with teeth. Lincoln High's school district called Micah's mother into a meeting. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and vague disappointment. Janelle sat stiffly in the visitor chair, hands folded in her lap, facing 3 administrators and a student resource officer. We're concerned, one of them began. About what, exactly? Janelle asked, her voice like tempered steel. Micah's influence. We've received messages from other students. Some are asking to review the lesson that led to the disruption. The principal interjected, "It's becoming a distraction." Janelle blinked. "You're telling me that my son, who's been suspended and sitting in a public library for 3 days, is still managing to disrupt your classrooms?" "Well," the counselor said, almost gently, "his online activity has reached beyond our school. It reflects on our institution." "And what, exactly, is the problem with that reflection?" she asked, voice rising. They didn't answer. They didn't need to. The meeting ended with the same line it always did, "We're just trying to help him stay on track." As if Micah had ever been allowed to choose his own tracks in the first place. That night, Janelle sat across from her son at the dinner table, arms crossed. "They think you're dangerous," she said quietly. Micah didn't flinch. "Because I built something that works." "Because you don't follow the rules," she said. Micah looked her in the eye. "Mom. The rules weren't made for me. They were made to keep me where I am." She sighed. Her eyes, so tired, so fierce, closed for a moment. "I know," she said. And just like that, the storm between them passed. The next morning, Micah returned to school. 3 days older. 3 years wiser. Students stared as he walked through the hallway. Some nodded. A few whispered. One kid handed him a folded note that said, "Thanks for saying what we all think." He tucked it in his pocket and kept moving. At lunch, he sat alone. Ava was out sick. The cafeteria buzzed like a swarm. But Micah? He opened his laptop, loaded up his interface, and kept coding between bites of cornbread and applesauce. That's when someone pulled up a chair across from him. "Ms. Ramirez." "Your code," she said, sliding a printed screenshot of his demo across the table, "is elegant." Micah blinked. "You watched it?" "I watched it 3 times, she said. "And I shared it with someone who teaches computer science at Spelman. She wants to talk to you." Micah stared at her. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Ms. Ramirez smiled. "Just, keep questioning. Keep building. They can suspend you from school, but not from truth." That night, as the city lights hummed outside his window and the buzz of praise mixed with threats online, Micah knew something for sure. He was never going to fit inside the lines. And maybe, just maybe, he was never supposed to. Atlanta had always spoken to Micah Davis in code. Not the binary kind. The real kind. The kind carved into cracked sidewalks, tagged on the backs of buses, echoed in the beats of passing cars. Street code. Life code. Rules that no textbook ever taught but that every black kid in the city learned by heart before they hit double digits. Micah was fluent in both. He could walk through the mechanics of a machine learning model while navigating a sidewalk full of hustlers, pastors, and city workers. He could map an algorithm to predict standardized test outcomes and dodge a cop's side eye at the same time. Because in Micah's world, intelligence wasn't about test scores. It was survival. The week after his return to school, he stopped sitting in the front row. Not because he was afraid, Micah didn't do fear. But because he'd learned something deeper than defiance, strategy. You can't fix a system from the outside if you can't see how it operates from within. He listened more. Observed. Took notes, not just on lessons, but on who was in the room when students were shut down, who was ignored when they raised their hands, whose names got forgotten and whose tone was disrespectful only when their skin was darker. His mind never stopped. At night, while his classmates scrolled through TikTok drama and Twitter beef, Micah was writing a new kind of program, one that tracked resource distribution in Atlanta's public schools. He pulled public data, mapped it by zip code, color-coded the results. The results weren't surprising, but they hit hard all the same. Schools in majority black neighborhoods had fewer AP classes, outdated textbooks, less funding per student. Some were still using science labs that hadn't been updated since 1994. He titled the project Patterns of intent, a visual study of educational disparity. He didn't make it for a grade. He made it for truth. Ava showed up again on Friday, hair in a messy bun, eyes shadowed from a migraine but defiant as ever. "You're blowing up," she said, sliding into the seat next to him in the back of the library during free period. "You know that, right?" Micah didn't look up from his screen. "Blowing up is loud. I'm just lighting fuses." "Fuses lead to fire," she said. "Just don't forget who's holding the match." He smirked. "You worried about me?" "Always," she said. "That's the curse of knowing a genius with a temper." Micah paused, leaned back. "I'm not angry." "Yeah," she said, raising a brow. "That's the scariest part." Over the weekend, Micah got an email. Subject line, "Your work is important, let's talk." It was from Dr. Shauna Green, a data ethics professor at Spelman College. Ava had really sent his code to her. He read the message twice before answering. "Micah, I believe your work represents the kind of forward thinking we need in educational tech. If you're open to it, I'd like to invite you to a roundtable discussion we're hosting for young innovators. You belong at this table." Micah didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. He typed out a response. Deleted it. Rewrote it. Then finally hit send. "Thank you. I'm in." The roundtable was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening, in a glass-walled seminar room on Spelman's campus. Micah had never set foot on a college campus before. His mother borrowed a shirt from a friend who worked in HR. Ava printed his code summary on fresh cardstock. Ms. Ramirez drove him there herself. "Why are you helping me?" Micah asked, eyes watching Atlanta blur past the window. "Because someone helped me once," she said. "And because you're going to change more than code, you're going to change lives." He didn't know what to say. So, he didn't. The seminar room was filled with grad students, professors, community activists, and a few other teens from across the city. Micah was the youngest in the room by at least 3 years. Still, when he spoke, everything got quiet. He explained the disparity map. The text simplification app. His vision for building a digital platform designed by students, for students, particularly those left behind by standardized education. When he was done, the room stayed silent. Then came the applause. Real applause. Not polite. Not performative. Real. Afterward, Dr. Green handed him a folder. "There's a tech nonprofit in Midtown," she said. "They're looking for interns with exactly your kind of brain. I told them about you." Micah opened the folder. Inside, an invitation to apply, along with a handwritten note. "Some people change the world with noise. You're doing it with code." He didn't smile. He grinned. When he got home that night, he found his mom asleep on the couch, her shoes still on, arms wrapped around a heating pad. He covered her with a blanket and sat beside her in the quiet. For a moment, he just stared out the window. The city lights blinked like code waiting to be written. He whispered into the dark. "I'm not just gonna make it out. I'm gonna build something they can't shut down." And somewhere deep inside him, the storm gave way to a rising wind. Micah Davis didn't know what it felt like to be famous, not really. But when he walked into Lincoln High that Monday morning, something had changed. Teachers stiffened when he passed. Students made way like he carried a badge no one could touch. Some gave him nods of quiet respect. Others looked away. But nobody ignored him anymore. Micah had gone from the kid who talked back to the kid who might blow everything wide open. And people don't like what they can't control. It wasn't long before the school called an assembly. The kind with the plastic chairs lined up under the gym's old banners, and the mics that squealed at the worst times. Every student had to attend. Principal Lawson stood at the front like a preacher at a revival, calm, smiling, composed. Beside him stood a man Micah had never seen before, sharp navy suit, gleaming shoes, silver-rimmed glasses. He looked like money. Old money. District money. "This is Mr. Carter," Principal Lawson said into the mic, Executive Director of Educational Integrity for the district. The title sounded made up. But the tone? Real power. Micah watched him. That calm smile. That subtle scan of the crowd, like he was measuring the weight of every student in the room. "We're here today," Carter began, "to talk about the importance of unity. Of respect. Of trusting the educational process designed to help you." Micah's jaw clenched. "We understand," Carter continued, "that recent events have sparked some disruption. Let me be clear, education is not a democracy. There's a reason we don't allow students to rewrite the curriculum. Because the curriculum is not the problem." The words were smooth. But the meaning was a brick. Ava leaned in and whispered, "He's here for you." Micah didn't blink. "Let him come." Carter paused, as if sensing something, and looked directly at Micah. Their eyes locked. It was subtle. Not a warning. A challenge. Later that week, Micah was pulled from sixth period. He walked into the main office where Carter was waiting. This time, they were alone. "Mr. Davis," Carter said, gesturing to a seat. "I've been reading about you." Micah Saturday, "A lot of people have." Carter smiled. "That's not always a good thing." There was a long pause. "You're very bright," Carter said. "Brighter than most kids I've met. But that kind of brightness needs direction. Otherwise, it burns instead of illuminates." Micah folded his arms. "So what, you're here to give me direction?" "No," Carter said. "I'm here to warn you." He leaned forward. "What you're building, the tools, the videos, the public statements, they've attracted attention. Not just from me. From donors. From the board. And not everyone likes what they see. So you're threatening me?" Micah asked. "I'm reminding you," Carter said coolly, "that not every system is changed by crashing through the gates. Some are changed from the inside. And the inside only opens to those who play the game." Micah stared at him. "That's the problem. I'm not here to play games." Carter's smile faded. "Then you'd better get used to losing." Micah didn't talk about the meeting that night. Not to his mom. Not even to Ava. He just sat on his bedroom floor, laptop open, algorithms on the screen, but his mind elsewhere. Carter wasn't some angry teacher or dismissive administrator. He was polished. Dangerous. The kind of person who could smile in your face while cutting off your future behind the scenes. Micah felt it in his bones. Carter wasn't just here to watch. He was here to end things before they began. The next morning, strange things started happening. Micah's school email was locked. His last 3 assignments disappeared from the grading portal. His access to the school Wi-Fi was blocked, for security reasons. Even his locker was reassigned without warning. Micah wasn't dumb. This was pressure. This was a system squeezing him in the dark, hoping he'd fold without making a sound. But instead of panicking, he got quieter. Sharper. He switched to burner emails. Bounced his traffic through proxies. Used the public library Wi-Fi and coded offline when he needed to. He knew how to survive under radar. Atlanta had taught him that. And still, he kept building. He finished the second phase of his education equity map. Added user uploads so students could submit their own stories, photos of ripped textbooks, screenshots of broken Chromebooks, stats on class sizes. And the stories flooded in. From students across Atlanta. From other states. Anonymous, but real. Micah launched the page with a single headline. "This is what they don't show you at school board meetings." It exploded. Local journalists picked it up. Community organizers started citing it. Parents began emailing the district asking for answers. Micah watched the numbers climb. Views. Shares. Comments. Then the hate came. Emails. DMs, voicemails full of slurs and threats. But he didn't stop. Because he finally understood, Carter wasn't his enemy. Carter was just the first wall in a whole fortress. That Friday, Ms. Ramirez pulled him aside after class. "Micah," she said gently, "I heard from someone I trust that the district is building a case." He looked at her. "A case? They're trying to prove that your site is a violation of student conduct," she said. "That you're inciting disruption." Micah snorted. "I am disrupting things. That's the point." She didn't smile. "They might try to expel you." Micah's face tightened. "Not in fear. In resolve." "Let them," he said. But that night, as he sat at his desk with lines of code in front of him and a city swirling outside, something deep inside him shifted. He wasn't just coding for attention anymore. Not even for justice. He was coding because he couldn't breathe in a world where silence was survival. He was coding to fight. And for the first time, he knew exactly what he was up against. By the time Monday came around, Micah Davis had become more than a student. He was a name. Whispers followed him through Lincoln High's hallways like shadows with purpose. Not loud ones. Not the kind that laughed or pointed. These were murmurs, quiet as prayers and just as dangerous. "He's the one who built that site, right? I heard he got the district shook. My cousin in DeKalb saw his video." It wasn't fame. It was signal, a ping bouncing from one person to the next, spreading faster than any administrator could track. Micah walked the halls with his head high, but inside, he felt the weight. Not of fear, he was used to fear. What pressed on him now was responsibility. People were looking to him. Not because he asked for it. Because they had to. The real shift happened in third period English. Mrs. Oates was discussing Fahrenheit 451, the part where books are being burned to erase knowledge. She asked the class, "Why would a government fear information?" A hand went up, DeAndre Walker. Usually quiet. Smart. Always played it safe. "Because knowledge makes people ask questions," he said, eyes flicking toward Micah. "And questions make power nervous." The class got still. Mrs. Oates nodded slowly, then wrote his words on the board like they were scripture. Micah didn't smile. But he felt it. The spark had jumped. After school, Ava was already waiting at his front steps, 2 iced coffees in hand, her sketchbook bulging from her tote. "You're on a list," she said without preamble. Micah blinked. "What?" She passed him a copy of an internal memo someone had leaked to her through a friend whose cousin worked in the district's tech department. Micah read it twice. Subject: Student-led educational activism, online tracking measures. His name was on page 3. Highlighted. Underlined. "They're building a case," she said. "Trying to frame your site as inciting unrest." Micah exhaled slowly. "So now I'm a threat on paper." "You've always been a threat," Ava said. "Now they're just scared enough to admit it." The next day, an anonymous Instagram account tagged Micah in a post. A picture of a hallway at another Atlanta high school. On the wall, in marker. "If they won't teach us truth, we'll code it ourselves. MD." More photos followed. Desks with his quote scribbled on them. Teachers caught citing his project. A poster in a cafeteria with a QR code that led straight to his equity map. Micah never made the posters. Never painted a wall. But someone else had. Dozens of them. Students he didn't know were passing his ideas like stolen candy. Study groups started calling themselves Micah Circles. Hashtag surfaced, hashtag code the truth, hashtag ask like Micah. A network was forming, no leader, no rules. Just momentum. The Whisper Network. He met a senior named Ellis that Friday, sharp, slick, and full of quiet fire. Your map changed everything, Ellis said, sliding into the seat beside Micah at lunch. We've been saying this stuff for years. You made it look official. Micah shrugged. I didn't do it for clout. Ellis grinned. Doesn't matter. You gave people something to hold. That's all it takes. They shook hands, and Micah felt something pass between them, an unspoken code, you're not alone anymore. But not everyone was inspired. Ms. Turner called him in after sixth period. You've been making waves, she said, closing the door behind her. I'll be clear, I don't support what the district is doing. But I also know you're becoming the lightning rod. And lightning rods attract more than energy. They attract storms. Micah leaned forward. I'm not trying to tear things down. I know, she said. But the people in charge. They don't care what you're trying. They only care what you're changing. She handed him a folder. Inside, a warning letter. Formal. Legal sounding. An official record of insubordination, and a notice that if further disruptions continued, more permanent disciplinary actions would be considered. Expulsion. Micah looked up. So this is it. One more move and I'm out. You're playing chess with people who move like they're playing poker, she said. Be careful. That night, he couldn't sleep. His laptop sat on the edge of the bed, glowing softly. Messages kept coming in. Testimonies. Code suggestions. Anonymous notes of support from teachers who signed with only initials. Micah read each one. He didn't respond. He just wrote. Not code. A letter. A mission statement for what he was building. Not an app. Not a movement. A framework. A way for students to create tools of their own. To measure what mattered. To map what wasn't being taught. To ask questions, and not get punished for asking them. By 4 a.m., the document was done. He titled it. Open Source Truth, a Student's Blueprint for Self-Education. And he hit publish. The next day, the district office server crashed from the number of people trying to access it. Micah walked into school like nothing happened. But he felt it. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were rumblings. And the people trying to stop him? They weren't just educators anymore. They were gatekeepers. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't stop, was that the gate was already broken. For the first time in weeks, Micah Davis didn't feel like a kid walking into school. He felt like a warning. The kind that made administrators whisper in tight circles and teachers shift their tone mid-lecture. The kind that showed up in board meetings they said were closed to the public. The kind that had parents dialing the school line, asking if the rumors were true, if their children were being radicalized by a boy with a website. Micah walked in with his hoodie up, headphones in, and a chip on his shoulder heavier than usual. The silence was louder than it had ever been. Not awkward. Not confused. Calculated. In second period history, the lesson changed. Suddenly, they were watching a video on civic engagement. It was glossy. Clean. Funded by a national education partner. It featured smiling kids, mostly white, shaking hands with mayors, starting garden clubs, volunteering for food drives. It ended with a message. Real change comes through respect, patience, and proper channels. Micah watched from the back of the class, jaw tight. This wasn't education. It was counter-programming. At lunch, Ava slid into the seat across from him, eyes scanning the room. They're freezing you out, she said. I know, Micah muttered. It's not just teachers, she added. A couple students are pulling away too. Scared. Someone's telling their parents you're dangerous. Good, Micah said, voice low. Let them be scared. She leaned forward. Micah, don't let this make you hard. He looked at her. I'm not getting hard, he said. I'm getting ready. Later that afternoon, he checked the website. Over 50,000 unique visitors in the last 48 hours. Dozens of new submissions, videos of leaking ceilings, broken lockers, substitute teachers reading from outdated packets, students speaking into their phones about what their schools lacked. But as the data grew, so did the backlash. His name was showing up on message boards now. Threads titled, "Is this kid for real?" and "Micah Davis, hero or hype?" Some called him brilliant. Others said he was making things worse. He wasn't shocked by the hate. What shook him was the silence from the people who should have been backing him. No word from Principal Lawson. No statements from the district. And Ms. Ramirez? Gone. Just, gone. Micah asked around, but no one would give a straight answer. He finally cornered Ms. Oates in the hallway. She's on administrative leave, she whispered, eyes darting around. They say it's for health reasons, but everyone knows. Micah swallowed hard. She stood up for me. I know. Now she's out. Yeah. The bell rang. But neither of them moved. Micah couldn't sleep that night. His room felt colder than usual. The weight of everything pressing in, expectations, blame, fear, fire. His code sat untouched for the first time in days. Instead, he stared at the ceiling, asking the questions no one would answer. Why do we have to fight this hard just to learn the truth? Why is asking questions enough to get someone removed? He turned to his notebook and scribbled in the dark. Sometimes silence is louder than hate. Because at least hate admits you exist. He carried that sentence with him the next day. To school. Through every class where his questions were ignored and his comments met with tight smiles and redirected discussions. To the cafeteria, where students no longer made eye contact. To the library, where his favorite study table was mysteriously reserved. To the computer lab, where his login was still blocked. They didn't have to scream. The quiet said enough. But Micah wasn't the type to disappear. He printed a fresh stack of flyers with a QR code leading to a new submission form titled, "Tell us what they won't let you say." He taped them in bathroom stalls. He slid them into the backs of textbooks. He dropped one in the front office suggestion box. And then he waited. That weekend, Ava called him. "I need to show you something," she said. "Meet me." 10 minutes later, she slid into the passenger seat of her older brother's Civic, laptop open on her lap. Micah leaned in. It was a private video message. Sent from Ms. Ramirez. She looked tired. Pale. But determined. "Micah, if you're watching this, it means they succeeded in pushing me out. But I want you to know, I'm proud of you. I knew the risk. I don't regret standing up for you. Keep going. Don't let them make you smaller. You were never meant to fit in their box." Micah didn't blink. Ava reached over and squeezed his hand. "Keep going," she whispered. He nodded, throat tight. "I will." Monday morning, he wore a black hoodie with bold white letters across the front. Not a threat. A truth. He didn't say a word in class. Didn't need to. By lunch, 5 more students had made knockoff versions with the same phrase. Different colors. Different fonts. Same message. And by Friday, 100 students showed up wearing them. Micah never asked them to. They just did. Because the silence had gotten too loud. And someone, finally, was answering back. Micah woke up to his phone buzzing relentlessly beside him. He had fallen asleep late, eyes burning from the screen he'd been glued to, scrolling through the growing number of messages, comments, and posts from students in his network. When he finally checked his notifications, his stomach twisted. It wasn't just the local high school anymore. His project had gone viral. There were students from across the city now, and some even from other states, sharing the same frustration. Students were making their own versions of the website, some using different platforms, others starting their own forums, all branching out from the seed he had planted. The movement wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a force. But the district was catching on. Micah stared at his phone for a long time before he even moved. He wasn't sure how it had gotten this far. It had started so small. A simple code to map out equity gaps in education, a quiet rebellion with the promise of transparency. He thought he was just solving a problem. But now the problem was much bigger than just his school. And he wasn't sure if he was ready to be the face of it. A quick scan of his messages confirmed it. The district had officially issued a warning to all teachers and administrators about outside influence on students. They were cracking down on the so-called revolution, trying to label it as disruptive behavior, but their words rang hollow. Everyone knew what this was really about. Micah had become more than a kid asking questions. He had become a symbol. By the time he stepped into school on Monday, the atmosphere was different. The usual buzz of students didn't feel quite as normal. There was an electric hum in the air, tension, but not the kind that Micah was used to. It was a sense of change. A collective awareness. As he walked into the hallway, several students gave him subtle nods. A few whispered under their breath as he passed. It wasn't like the day before when they would avoid eye contact or talk behind his back. Now, they were acknowledging him. In their own way, they were standing with him. Micah made his way to his locker, only to find a piece of paper shoved inside. He unfolded it carefully, feeling his heart rate speed up as he read the bold, handwritten words. "You're either with us or against us. The truth is louder than your silence. We know you're the one who started it." He exhaled deeply. It wasn't an anonymous note. It was an invitation. To join. To lead. When the bell rang for first period, Micah didn't go straight to class. Instead, he walked to the back stairwell. He had learned from Ava that there was a quiet meeting happening in the computer lab during lunch, students planning their next move, organizing ideas for the next phase of their operation. Micah didn't need to think twice. He knew this was bigger than just a digital project now. He was being asked to lead something larger. Something that might change everything. As he entered the lab, the buzz of students faded. They were all staring at a projector screen, which displayed a series of numbers and charts. In the center was a large map, showing various schools in the district, with red dots representing areas of systemic failure. There was a sense of urgency in the room. Ellis waved him over. "We're scaling this thing up. It's not just about your website anymore. We need to take this to the next level." Micah sat down beside him, trying to ignore the weight in his chest. "What's the plan? We need to start publicizing this. Districts won't change until people know what's going on. We've got to go viral again, but this time, it's not just about talking. It's about action." Ellis's eyes gleamed with determination. "We need to start showing the world what they're doing." Micah nodded, his mind racing. "We need to be careful. This isn't just a school project anymore. The district won't just punish us, they'll make an example of us." "I know," Ellis said. "But we can't let that stop us. This is bigger than us." For the first time in weeks, Micah felt the same fire burning in him. This was bigger than his school. This was about something real. Something that had been building for years and years in silence, waiting to explode. And now, it was his turn to lead that explosion. At lunch, Micah stood in front of a classroom full of students, his heart beating in his throat. He had been asked to give a speech. A speech he didn't prepare for. He opened his mouth, unsure of what would come out, but the words poured from him like code, fluid, logical, with just enough passion to make them stick. "This isn't just about us," he began. "This isn't about me. It's about everyone who's been ignored, everyone who's been silenced, and everyone who's had to suffer in a broken system because no one listened. It's about every student who's been told they don't matter, every student who's been told their voice isn't valuable." He paused, scanning the room. "This is a code we all have in our blood. A code we've always known. The system doesn't work for us, but it will. It has to. And if it doesn't, we will make it work for us." He could see the fire in their eyes. The same fire that was burning inside of him. After the speech, the students didn't disperse. They lingered, asking questions, planning their next steps. Micah felt it, they were no longer asking if they should fight back. They were deciding how. As he walked out of the classroom, Ava caught up with him. She had a hesitant smile on her face, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're sure about this?" she asked. Micah hesitated for only a moment. "I don't think I have a choice anymore." "I thought you'd say that," she said quietly. "But we've got to be ready. This is going to get a lot worse before it gets better." "I know," he said, looking at the ground. "But it has to be done." And for the first time, Micah understood something that hadn't fully clicked before: the code he was writing wasn't just for a website. It was for a revolution. A movement. A collective uprising of minds and hearts that had been ignored for too long. And he was the key to it. But now, with the weight of so many people's hopes and dreams on his shoulders, Micah knew he had to be smarter. Stronger. If he was going to change this, he couldn't just be the guy with the ideas anymore. He had to be the leader. And that scared him. But not enough to stop. The night Micah decided to make the post, everything seemed to freeze. He sat in front of his computer, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen. His fingers hovered over the keys, uncertain, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew exactly what this would set into motion. The district was already on his tail. He could feel it. His inbox was flooded with new threats, new calls for his expulsion. They were scrambling, trying to stop him before he went too far. But Micah was no longer worried about getting caught. He wasn't afraid of the consequences anymore. He'd already crossed the point of no return. The question was, what would the rest of the world do once they saw what he was about to show them? With a deep breath, Micah typed. "It's time to tell the truth. They can't silence us anymore. The walls of their system are about to crack, and when they do, we'll be standing on the other side." He hit post and sat back. His heart raced as the screen filled with notifications. It was happening. This was it. It didn't take long before the wave hit. By the time Micah woke up the next morning, the post had gone viral. His words spread like wildfire across social media. Students were taking to their phones, sending the message out to their friends, their parents, their communities. He wasn't just talking about his school anymore. The movement had spread across districts. His simple words had opened the floodgates, and now, thousands of people were demanding accountability from school boards, from lawmakers, from the people who had been in charge of their education for far too long. But with that surge of support came a surge of resistance. Micah knew it was coming. The emails started flooding in, threats, accusations, demands for him to stop before things got worse. The school board released a public statement denouncing the dangerous rhetoric of students engaging in subversive activities. The media began to pick up the story, spinning it as a tale of a disgruntled student trying to disrupt the educational system. They were playing the game they always played. The same game his father had warned him about when he was younger. The one where the powerful always painted the rebels as the villains, always trying to turn the public against them. But this time, Micah wasn't going to back down. At lunch, the cafeteria was buzzing with whispers. Micah could feel the weight of it. He had become the focal point of every conversation. Some students were still fearful, glancing at him with hesitation, but many were standing with him. They wore the same shirts, shared the same hashtag. The resistance was growing, but so was the fight against it. Ava slid into the seat next to him, her phone in her hand. "You saw this, right?" She showed him a post from the local news station. The headline read, "Student leader of controversial website faces backlash from school district." Micah grimaced. "I knew they'd go there. They can't let this go. They have to make me the villain." "Of course they do," Ava said, scanning the comments. "But you're not the villain. You're just the messenger. And they always shoot the messenger," Micah said bitterly. He glanced at the corner of the cafeteria, where a group of teachers were huddled, whispering among themselves. It wasn't long before Principal Lawson showed up, walking briskly toward Micah's table, a grim expression on his face. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at him as if waiting for something. Micah didn't flinch. He met Lawson's gaze and waited. "You're stirring up trouble, Davis," Lawson finally said. "You have to stop this. You're causing a disruption. If you don't." "I'm not going to stop," Micah cut him off. "This isn't a disruption. This is the truth. You're afraid of what's coming. And I'm not going to back down just because you're scared." Lawson's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. He turned and walked away, his footsteps loud against the tile floor. Micah exhaled, his heart racing, but there was no fear now. Only resolve. This wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't even just about his school. It was about an entire generation of students who had been overlooked, silenced, and ignored. And that, Micah realized, was something he could no longer allow. The next few days were a blur of activity. The media coverage grew, but so did the pressure from the school. They began to target him directly. His locker was searched without explanation. His social media accounts were scrutinized. He was called into the principal's office more than once, each time with new threats. The school board issued a formal letter calling for his suspension. But Micah kept going. Every move they made to silence him only strengthened his resolve. He had found his voice, and the more they tried to shut him down, the louder it got. At night, he stayed up late, working with Ellis and the other students who had been helping him organize. They created new content, new strategies for getting their message out. They had to stay one step ahead. But it was clear to Micah that they were growing something much bigger than just a protest. They were building a movement. And the resistance wasn't just coming from the school anymore. It was coming from the establishment. The system. Micah was starting to see the cracks. And he knew that if they pushed hard enough, they might just bring it all down. By the end of the week, something incredible happened. A group of teachers who had been quietly supporting Micah reached out to him, offering their full support. They said they couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. They couldn't let fear dictate their actions. They wanted to help him expose what had been happening behind the scenes. It was a game changer. Micah realized that the echoes of resistance were not just coming from students. They were coming from the very people who were supposed to be enforcing the rules. And now, he had allies within the system itself. Allies who were ready to fight for change. It wasn't just about Micah anymore. It was about everyone who had been silenced. Micah smiled to himself as he watched the students in the hallway wear their "not a threat. A truth" shirts with pride. They were making a statement. And Micah knew that no matter how loud the resistance grew, it wouldn't be enough to stop them now. The letter came at the worst possible time. Micah had just finished a late-night meeting with Ava and Ellis, strategizing the next phase of their movement. The feedback they were receiving from other districts was overwhelming. Students from all across the country were sharing their own stories of inequality, broken systems, and unjust policies. The website was now a hub for all those voices, and the momentum was building at an exponential rate. Micah thought he was ready for whatever the system might throw at him, but nothing could have prepared him for the weight of that letter. It was a certified letter from the school board, delivered to his house early Saturday morning. He stood in the doorway, staring at the envelope, his heart sinking. He had been expecting this, but it didn't make it any easier to see it in writing. He opened it slowly, his hands trembling slightly. The first line hit like a punch to the gut. Due to your ongoing actions and the disruption you have caused, the school district has voted to suspend you for a period of no less than 10 days. This decision is final and will be implemented immediately. Micah exhaled sharply, his breath caught in his chest. He read the letter again, hoping it would somehow say something different, but it didn't. The words were clear. The system had come down hard on him. They were trying to silence him, trying to make an example of him. The thing was, Micah didn't care about the suspension anymore. What scared him was what this meant for the movement. For the students who were relying on him. He grabbed his phone and texted Ava. "It's happening. They're suspending me. What now?" Ava's reply came a few moments later. "It doesn't change anything. You're not the only one in this fight. We're still going. If anything, this just makes our case stronger. You're not alone, Micah." She was right. Micah knew that. But even though the words gave him some comfort, they didn't erase the frustration that churned inside him. Every move they made to stop him only proved that they were afraid. The school board, the district, even the media, they were afraid of the change that was coming. They couldn't stop it, so they were trying to bury it. But it wasn't working. Not this time. On Monday, Micah packed his things and walked to school with his head held high. It was a walk he had taken countless times, but today felt different. There was no going back. The suspension had already been decided, but that didn't mean he was going to just sit back and let it happen without a fight. When he entered the building, he was greeted with a mixture of support and unease. Some students gave him nods of solidarity, while others whispered behind their hands. He had become a symbol, but he wasn't sure if they saw him as a hero or a threat. Either way, he wasn't backing down. Ava was already waiting for him in the hallway when he reached his locker. Her face was serious, but her eyes were determined. "So, what's the plan?" she asked, leaning against the lockers. Micah smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "The plan is to make sure this doesn't stop us. We've got more people than ever now, Ava. And we're not just going to roll over." She nodded. "Good. I've been thinking, this suspension, it's the perfect moment for us to take things to the next level. We can use it to show them just how far they're willing to go to silence us." Micah looked at her, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Ava pushed herself off the locker, stepping closer. "We need to make it clear to everyone that what they're doing is a violation of free speech, that it's about control, not about discipline. This isn't just about your suspension. This is about every student who has ever been punished for speaking out." Micah thought about it for a moment. Ava was right. The suspension wasn't the end, it was the beginning of the next phase. He wasn't going to let them make him an example. He wasn't going to let them shut him down. "If we want to change this system," Micah said, looking her in the eye, "we have to make the world see it for what it is. We can't hide behind these walls. We need to take the fight to them." Ava grinned. "That's what I like to hear. You ready for the next step?" Micah didn't hesitate. "I was born ready." That afternoon, Micah went to the computer lab. He had a plan, and he was going to execute it, no matter the consequences. He sat at his usual desk, powered up his laptop, and pulled up the website they had built. This time, he wasn't going to just publish another post. He was going to send a message. A big one. The site had become a space where students, parents, and even teachers could share their stories. But now, it needed to be a platform for action. It needed to show the world that this wasn't just a school issue, it was a systemic issue, one that affected communities everywhere. And Micah was ready to make sure everyone knew it. He clicked on the broadcast button and started typing. The time for silence is over. I have been suspended for questioning a system that has oppressed us for too long. But this is not just my fight. It's the fight of every student who has ever been silenced, every teacher who has been ignored, every parent who has been told they don't matter. This is not just about me. This is about the future of education. This is about the future of our children. And we will not back down. He hit submit and watched as the message went live, the words flashing across the screen like an alarm bell. Micah didn't know what he expected next. He had sent the message out, hoping to ignite something bigger, but he didn't expect the explosion of support that came almost immediately. His phone started buzzing with notifications. Texts. Emails. Messages. Comments. The world was waking up. The movement was no longer just a local rebellion, it was becoming a nationwide movement. A wave of solidarity poured in from students, teachers, parents, and activists. From every corner of the country, people were rallying around Micah's message. They were sharing their own stories. They were demanding change. And they were not going to be ignored. Micah sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of it all. He had broken the chains. And there was no turning back now. The days that followed Micah's suspension felt like a whirlwind. What had started as a small act of defiance against his school district had rapidly escalated into a national conversation. The movement he and his friends had sparked was spreading faster than anyone could have anticipated. His post, which had initially been aimed at calling out the unjust suspension, had turned into a rallying cry. Across the country, students who had once felt powerless began to rise. Teachers, too, started to lend their voices, each one adding fuel to the fire. Micah sat at his desk, watching the screen of his laptop as more and more comments flooded in. The website had become an epicenter of the revolution. His inbox was filled with messages from people he didn't know, students from schools on the other side of the country, parents in small towns, and even educators who had spent years trying to make a difference but felt too beaten down by the system to do so. They were reaching out, asking for advice, sharing their own struggles, and offering their support. Micah felt the weight of it all. He was no longer just a student. He was the face of a movement, and it was bigger than anything he could have imagined. Ava and Ellis had become his closest allies in the fight. They worked tirelessly, answering emails, managing the website, and brainstorming strategies for how to expand their reach. But Micah knew that as the movement grew, so did the risks. "You're a target now," Ellis said one evening as the three of them sat in the dimly lit corner of a coffee shop. "The more attention you get, the harder it's going to be to keep this under the radar." Micah had been thinking the same thing. He knew that the system would try to crush the movement. They would target him, his family, anyone who was connected to him. But he also knew that if they wanted to silence him, they'd have to go through an army of students, parents, and teachers who were now standing with him. "I'm not going anywhere," Micah said firmly. "I've come this far, and I'm not backing down now." Ava leaned forward. "We need to keep pushing, but we also need to be smart. We can't just throw ourselves into the fire without a plan. We've got to go bigger. National media. Interviews. The whole thing." Micah nodded. He had been getting messages from journalists asking for interviews. They wanted to know more about the student leader who had sparked such a large-scale movement. But Micah wasn't interested in just talking. He wanted action. He wanted change. "You're right," he said. "We need to make sure the world sees this. But I don't want to just be a face on a screen. I want people to understand that this is about all of us. This isn't just my fight. It's everyone's." The following week, Micah and his team began to strategize how to take the movement to the next level. They created a detailed plan, mapping out every step, from engaging with the media to organizing rallies and protests in multiple cities. They would hold press conferences, interview with influencers, and partner with other grassroots organizations fighting for similar causes. It wasn't long before the first major opportunity arrived. A news outlet, the National Observer, reached out with an exclusive request for an interview. They wanted to do a profile on Micah, highlighting his leadership in the movement and the broader implications of his stand against the school district. Micah knew this was a big deal. This could be the moment when the whole world would take notice. But with that attention came even more scrutiny. The school district ramped up their efforts to discredit him, making sure that every journalist who contacted him was provided with a counter-narrative. The district framed Micah as a troublemaker, a student who was being manipulated by outside forces. Micah wasn't surprised. He had known from the beginning that they would try to silence him by any means necessary. But this time, they couldn't control the narrative. Not anymore. The day of the interview with the National Observer arrived, and Micah sat in front of a camera, trying to calm his nerves. The reporter, a woman in her mid-30s named Claire, adjusted the camera and gave him an encouraging smile. "Are you ready?" she asked. Micah nodded, taking a deep breath. "Ready." Claire began, "So, Micah, your story has gone viral. What started as a small protest against your school's disciplinary actions has grown into a national movement. How do you feel about all of this attention?" Micah paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. This was his moment to speak, to make sure his message was heard. "I feel proud," he said. "But more than that, I feel a sense of responsibility. This isn't just about me or what happened at my school. This is about every student who has ever been silenced for speaking up. It's about the students who are told their voices don't matter, who are punished for questioning authority, who are forced to sit in classrooms that don't teach them anything about the world they live in. This is about all of us." Claire nodded, jotting down notes. "And what's next?" "You've been suspended, but that hasn't stopped the movement. What's your goal moving forward?" Micah's gaze hardened. He knew this question was coming. This was where the stakes became real. This was the moment when he could either back down or double down. "I want to make sure that no student has to go through what I went through," he said firmly. "But I also want to make sure we're not just protesting. We're pushing for actual change. We want to change the way education is run, how schools treat students, how they listen to us. We want to tear down the walls they've built around us." The words hung in the air, powerful and unrelenting. This was bigger than just one student, one school district, or even one city. This was a movement that was sweeping across the country, and it was only gaining momentum. The interview aired the next evening, and by the time the sun set, it had been shared by thousands of people. Social media erupted. News outlets picked up the story. Micah's face was everywhere, on TV, on social media, in newspapers. His words resonated deeply with so many people, and the message was clear: the time for change was now. As the movement gained momentum, Micah could feel the pressure mounting. The school district didn't back down, and the stakes only grew higher. But so did the fire. The people who supported him were relentless. They showed up to protests, shared their stories online, and spoke out in every way they could. Micah was no longer just a student. He was a leader of something far greater than he had ever imagined. The fight had just begun, and now, there was no turning back. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The phone call came just as Micah was preparing to leave his house for another rally. His mom had been silent for the past few days, watching him from the kitchen table, but today, her eyes were filled with something Micah had rarely seen: concern. "Micah, you need to take this call," she said, holding up her phone. He knew who it was before he even picked it up. The moment he saw the name on the screen, his stomach sank. It was Principal Anderson. He answered with a forced calmness. Micah, we need to talk. I know you're angry, Micah, Anderson said, his voice strained, but this has gone too far. This isn't just about a suspension anymore. It's about the school's reputation. It's about the district's reputation. Micah's hand tightened around the phone. What do you want from me, Anderson? I've already told you, I'm not backing down. I'm not going to pretend everything is fine when it's not. There was a brief silence on the other end, before Anderson spoke again, this time quieter, more serious. You've stirred up a lot of noise, Micah. But now, we've got a real problem. People are watching. The district board is meeting tomorrow, and if this continues, they're considering taking legal action. Micah's breath caught in his throat. Legal action? They can't do that, he muttered under his breath, but even he wasn't sure if that was true. Anderson continued, his voice now edged with frustration. We're trying to keep this from escalating, Micah. But if you don't cooperate, if you don't back down from your position, we'll have no choice. We'll take this to the courts. The cold weight of those words settled over him. Micah had been anticipating a pushback, but this? Legal action was a whole new level. I'll never back down, Micah said firmly, gripping the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. Do what you have to do, but I won't stop. He hung up without waiting for a response. He wasn't sure what Anderson thought he could achieve with threats. Micah had already been labeled a troublemaker, a rebel. There was nothing more they could take from him. But the possibility of legal action had just made everything real. He turned to face his mother, who was still watching him from the kitchen. They're not going to stop, Mom. They're serious about going after me now. She stood up, walking toward him, her expression torn between pride and worry. Micah, you've come so far, but this is dangerous. Legal battles, public scrutiny, threats, they're not something to take lightly. You need to think about your future. Micah met her gaze, the weight of her words hitting him with the force of a storm. He had always known that his fight for justice would have consequences, but now that the stakes were so high, it felt different. More personal. His mom had always been his rock, but now, he could see the concern in her eyes. It was hard to ignore. I know, Mom. I've thought about it, he said, his voice heavy. But this isn't just about me anymore. It's about every kid in every school who's ever been told to be quiet, to sit down, to stop questioning things. His mom was silent for a long moment, and for a second, Micah felt a pang of guilt. Maybe he was too stubborn. Maybe he was pushing too hard, too fast. But then she spoke again, and he heard the pride in her voice, mixed with the weight of her worries. Just promise me, Micah, that whatever happens, you won't lose yourself in all this. I don't care how far you go, just don't forget who you are. Her words resonated in his heart, but Micah knew what he had to do. He couldn't stop now. Not when everything was on the line. The rally that evening was unlike anything they had ever organized. More than 500 students had gathered, standing in solidarity, waving signs, chanting slogans. The energy was electrifying, the crowd's collective voice filling the air with the power of resistance. Micah stood at the front, feeling the weight of it all. This was the tipping point. No longer just about one student's suspension or one school's problems, it had become a movement, a force too powerful to ignore. Ava was beside him, her eyes scanning the crowd. This is it, she said. We've hit the tipping point. We're not just fighting for change anymore. We're fighting for justice. Micah nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. We need to keep pushing. This isn't just about protests. We need to start getting lawmakers involved. We need to go to Washington. Ava raised an eyebrow. That's a huge step, Micah. Are you sure we're ready for that? Micah's eyes were fixed on the sea of faces before him. He saw their hope, their determination. He saw students from every walk of life, each one carrying their own story, their own pain, but all united in one common purpose. He knew what he had to do. "We're ready," he said quietly, more to himself than to Ava. "We have to be." The media attention had exploded in the days following the rally. News outlets from across the country covered the growing movement, interviewing students, teachers, parents, and activists who were standing alongside Micah. The movement was no longer just a school protest, it had become a social justice movement. Micah knew they had to keep the momentum going. But as the pressure mounted, so did the risks. The district had officially issued a statement declaring that Micah's actions were disruptive and unacceptable. Legal action was still a looming threat, and the school board was not backing down. One morning, Micah woke up to a notification on his phone that made his heart stop. A court date had been set. The district was moving forward with a lawsuit against Micah, accusing him of defamation, disruption, and creating a hostile environment at the school. The charges weren't just aimed at him, they were aimed at the entire movement. They were trying to crush it before it could grow any further. Micah's stomach twisted in knots. The moment he had feared was here. This wasn't just about his future anymore. It was about the future of everyone who had supported him. He looked out the window, watching the sun rise, but the weight of everything on his shoulders felt heavier than ever. The fight was about to get much harder. But there was no turning back now. Micah Davis was going to fight. For every student who had ever been silenced, for every teacher who had ever been ignored, and for the future of education itself. And no matter what happened, he wouldn't back down. The court date was set, and with it, a sense of unease settled over Micah. Every day felt like he was standing on the edge of something big, something irreversible. He could feel the weight of the lawsuit bearing down on him, but he couldn't let it break him. Not now, not when the stakes were this high. The media was relentless. Every time Micah checked his phone, there were new headlines, new stories, each one trying to paint him in a different light. Some outlets called him a hero, a symbol of student activism. Others painted him as a troublemaker, a kid who didn't know his place, someone who had gone too far. The school district was playing their cards too, pushing their own narrative. They had hired a PR firm to control the narrative, framing Micah's actions as disruptive and dangerous to the educational environment. They painted him as a bad influence on the students, the kind of troublemaker who didn't belong in the system. Micah knew this was coming. He had been prepared for the fight. But every article, every tweet, every interview from the district felt like a personal attack. The pressure was mounting from all sides. It wasn't just the media that was bearing down on him. The school board had gotten more aggressive. They had hired a team of lawyers to press charges against him for defamation, claiming that Micah's social media posts and interviews had damaged the reputation of the district and its staff. It was overwhelming. The night before the hearing, Micah sat in his room, staring at the wall. The noise of the world outside seemed to fade away. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, the enormity of the situation hit him harder than he'd imagined. He wasn't just fighting for his own reputation anymore. He was fighting for the future of education, for every student who had ever felt ignored, misunderstood, or silenced. But could he really do this? Could he go up against a system this powerful and win? His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Ava. She'd been the one keeping things together while he worked on the legal side, managing the website, coordinating protests, and making sure the movement stayed focused. "We're all behind you, Micah. You've already changed everything. Tomorrow is just one more step. Let's keep pushing." Micah smiled, though it felt bittersweet. He had always been the quiet kid, the one who didn't seek attention. Now, his name was known across the country. It was more than he had ever imagined. And it scared him. But Micah wasn't a quitter. He couldn't afford to be. Not now. The morning of the court hearing arrived, and Micah's heart pounded in his chest as he sat in the back of the courtroom, waiting for everything to begin. His lawyer, a young woman named Natalie who had been assigned to him by one of the activists who had reached out, sat beside him, reviewing notes. She was calm, professional, and determined, but even she couldn't deny the gravity of what was happening. "I know this isn't easy," Natalie said softly, her eyes scanning the room. "But we're in the right. You didn't break any laws. You're standing up for what's right." Micah nodded, though the tension in his gut didn't ease. He wasn't afraid of the district's lawyers, who sat across the room, looking smug in their suits. He wasn't even afraid of the lawsuit itself, though it had the potential to ruin him. No, what scared him most was the possibility that this whole movement would fizzle out, that it would be crushed before it could make the kind of change he believed in. And then, the judge entered. The courtroom fell silent. The air felt thick with anticipation. Micah's eyes scanned the room, taking in the unfamiliar faces, the reporters taking notes, the onlookers who had come to see what would happen. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, sat down and called the hearing to order. Micah's heart raced as the proceedings began. His lawyer made her arguments first, laying out how Micah's actions were a result of systemic failures in the school district. She emphasized that Micah had not acted out of malice but had simply spoken up about the injustices he had witnessed. She also highlighted the power of the movement that Micah had sparked, how it had led to meaningful conversations across the country about the treatment of students in schools. The district's lawyers, on the other hand, painted a very different picture. They spoke about disruption, about how Micah's social media posts had undermined the school's authority and caused chaos. They accused him of being a bad influence on the other students, a distraction that made it harder for the school to function. Micah clenched his fists. It was clear the district wasn't going to give up easily. They had the resources, the influence, and the power. But Micah had something else, the truth, and a whole army of people standing behind him. When it was Micah's turn to speak, he stood up, taking a deep breath as he walked to the podium. The eyes of the courtroom were on him, his family, his lawyer, the district's representatives, the reporters. He could feel the weight of it all. But this wasn't about him. This was about everyone who had ever felt unheard, everyone who had ever been told to sit down and shut up. This was about making sure their voices were heard. "I'm not here to disrupt anyone," Micah began, his voice steady but firm. "I'm here because I believe in something bigger than myself. I believe in a future where students have the power to speak up, to ask questions, to challenge authority when it's wrong. I'm not the problem, our education system is. The way it silences students, the way it ignores us when we try to speak out. That's the problem." He paused, looking around the room. "And this movement? This is just the beginning. It's not about me. It's about every student who has ever been told that they don't matter. It's about every teacher who has had their hands tied by a system that doesn't care about real change. It's about everyone who's ever been told to keep quiet and accept things as they are. That's not how progress happens." The courtroom was silent. Micah could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, but he didn't falter. This was his moment to speak his truth. "I'm not backing down," he said, his voice growing stronger with every word. "And neither are the thousands of students, parents, and teachers who are standing with me. You can take me to court, you can try to shut me down, but you can't stop this. Because this movement is bigger than all of us. And we're not going away." As he finished speaking, there was a long silence. The judge looked at him, her face unreadable. But Micah knew one thing for sure, he had just made his stand. And no matter what happened next, he wasn't going to back down. The battle was far from over. But Micah had just crossed a line. There was no going back now. The days after the court hearing blurred together. The media coverage skyrocketed, as did the number of students and activists rallying around Micah's cause. It was no longer just a fight against one district. Micah's battle had sparked something much larger, a national conversation about the need for reform in schools, a need for student voices to be heard and valued. But with this wave of support came an avalanche of pressure. Micah's phone was constantly buzzing with notifications, messages of encouragement from strangers, reporters trying to get interviews, and emails from educators, students, and parents who wanted to get involved. The movement had reached a tipping point. It was no longer just a protest, it was a revolution, and Micah had become its reluctant leader. Micah had never wanted to be in the spotlight. But now, the spotlight was on him, and it was impossible to ignore. "Micah, you're trending again," Ava said, waving her phone in front of his face as they sat together in his living room. He had spent most of the morning answering emails, but Ava was right, he'd seen it too. The hashtag Micah Matters was everywhere, plastered on social media, news articles, and even TV segments. His words from the court hearing had been shared over and over again. "I don't know how I feel about it," Micah admitted, rubbing his temples. He hadn't had a quiet moment in days, and his nerves were fraying. Every time he checked his social media, he saw comments from people telling him he was a hero, or worse, telling him he was doing the wrong thing. But through it all, there were voices that mattered, voices that believed in the cause. "You have to understand, Micah, you've done more in a few weeks than most people do in a lifetime. You've started a conversation that's too big to ignore," Ava said, her voice firm but encouraging. Micah looked at her, uncertainty still clouding his thoughts. "I don't know if I can handle this. I mean, I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to get my point across. Now, I'm being called everything from a hero to a villain." Ava gave him a small, understanding smile. "It's not easy. It's never easy. But you're not alone in this. We're all in this together. And whether you like it or not, you've started something that can change everything." She was right. He had started something much bigger than himself. He had ignited a fire that was spreading faster than he could control. As the days went by, the pressure from the school district mounted. They had issued a public statement condemning Micah's actions, calling his movement a distraction and insisting that the school needed to restore order, for the benefit of all students. They were pushing back harder than ever, and Micah's lawyers had to work overtime to prepare for the impending trial. But Micah's team wasn't slowing down either. Natalie, his lawyer, was working on drafting a counterclaim, arguing that Micah's rights had been violated under the First Amendment. The counterclaim would bring a spotlight not only on the district's overreach but on the systemic issues within the education system that Micah had been fighting to expose. And then there were the rallies. Every week, they were getting bigger. More students, more parents, more teachers were showing up, each one voicing their support for Micah's movement. What started as a few dozen students standing outside the school had grown into crowds of thousands at rallies across the country. Ava had arranged a rally in Washington, D.C., the day before the court trial was set to resume, hoping to draw even more attention to the cause. The event had the potential to become a turning point. If it went well, the movement could gain momentum that would be impossible to stop. But that night, as Micah prepared for the rally, something felt different. His phone had gone silent for the past hour, and then, out of nowhere, the messages started flooding in, one after another. At first, he thought it was just more words of encouragement, but as he began to read the messages, his stomach churned. "They're trying to silence you. The district is ready to drop the hammer on you. Stay strong, Micah. You've made a target of yourself. Be careful." Micah stopped reading. He could feel his heartbeat quicken. He wasn't sure what was worse, the fear that was creeping in or the feeling that everything was spiraling beyond his control. He looked up at his mother, who had been sitting quietly across the room. "Mom, what if they're right? What if I really am just causing more chaos than change?" She stood up slowly, walking over to him with a look of quiet understanding. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed her hand on his shoulder and looked him in the eyes, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Micah, I've watched you grow up. I've seen you fight for what's right from the day you could talk. I know how hard this is, but I also know you. You don't back down. Not when you know the truth. And the truth is, what you're doing is more than just about you. It's about all the kids who feel ignored, all the voices that have never been heard. Micah closed his eyes, her words grounding him. He didn't have to fight alone. And he couldn't let fear stop him now. He had already come this far, and he couldn't let them win by making him doubt himself. I'm going to do this, he said finally, looking up at her. I'm going to keep going. She smiled softly, her eyes filled with pride. That's my boy. The next day, the rally in D.C. was larger than Micah could have ever imagined. Thousands of people filled the National Mall, holding signs, chanting slogans, and listening to speakers who shared their stories of feeling oppressed or unheard in the educational system. It wasn't just students this time, it was teachers, parents, activists, and everyday people who believed in what Micah was fighting for. Micah stood at the front of the crowd, taking it all in. The energy was overwhelming, but in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in days: hope. As he took the microphone to speak, the crowd fell silent, waiting for his words. He could feel the weight of their expectations, but he wasn't afraid. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future. We've reached a tipping point, Micah began, his voice steady, rising with confidence. What we're doing here today is bigger than a lawsuit, bigger than any fight against one school district. It's about changing a system that's failed too many of us for too long. This is a movement for justice, for equality, for the future of our children. And it's just getting started. The crowd erupted in applause, the energy surging around him. Micah knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back now. The courtroom was packed again, but this time, the atmosphere was different. There was a quiet tension, not the hostility or aggression that had permeated the room before. Today, something had shifted. Micah could feel it, even as he sat quietly, listening to the exchange between his lawyer, Natalie, and the opposing team. It had been 2 weeks since the rally in Washington, D.C., and the momentum behind the movement had only grown stronger. His case had captured the attention of the nation. The media coverage, once focused on attacking him, had started to shift in his favor. More and more people were beginning to see what he had been fighting for: an educational system that worked for everyone, not just the privileged few. The school district had come to court with their usual defense, arguing that Micah's actions were disruptive and had caused irreparable harm to the institution. They continued to claim that his social media posts and interviews had incited chaos and undermined the authority of the school. But this time, something had changed. Micah wasn't just a student fighting back, he had become a symbol of something much bigger. And the district's argument, once so powerful, now seemed hollow. Natalie stood before the judge, her voice calm but assertive, as she outlined the case for why Micah's actions were protected by the First Amendment. She spoke about the importance of student activism, the right to free speech, and the larger issue at hand: the systemic flaws in the school system that had caused Micah to speak out in the first place. The district's attorneys had no answer for this. They had been prepared to argue about discipline, disruption, and the need for control, but they hadn't anticipated the overwhelming public support Micah had garnered. They hadn't anticipated the change in the public discourse. And now, they were on the defensive. As the session continued, Micah could feel the tide turning in his favor. There was no denying the strength of the argument his team had built. It wasn't just about his individual case anymore. It was about every student who had ever been silenced, every teacher who had ever felt powerless, every parent who had ever felt that the system wasn't working for their child. And then, the judge spoke. "I have reviewed the evidence presented by both sides," she said, her voice steady, her eyes never leaving the papers in front of her. "It is clear that Micah Davis's actions were within his rights as a citizen of this country. The right to free speech, even for students, is a fundamental part of our democracy. It is the duty of the schools to foster an environment where students can express their ideas and challenge the status quo without fear of retaliation." Micah's heart skipped a beat. His lawyer exchanged a brief, triumphant glance with him before turning back to the judge. The district's actions, the judge continued, in trying to suppress Mr. Davis's voice, have not only violated his constitutional rights but have also undermined the very values that we, as a society, hold dear. Micah couldn't believe what he was hearing. This was it. This was the moment they'd been fighting for. It was a victory, not just for him, but for every student who had ever felt like their voice didn't matter. The judge wasn't done yet. However, she added, her gaze now shifting to the school district's legal team, the court acknowledges that the district has a responsibility to maintain order and discipline. I expect both parties to work together in finding a resolution that allows for the protection of students' rights while ensuring that the educational environment is conducive to learning. Micah exhaled slowly. It wasn't a full, unqualified victory. The court had not ruled that the district's actions were entirely unlawful, but it had made it clear that Micah had the right to speak out. The message was powerful: students had the right to challenge the system, to demand better, and to make their voices heard. As the judge called for a recess, Micah felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had just won the first battle in what was sure to be a long and difficult war. He could already feel the energy shift around him. Ava, standing at the back of the room, caught his eye and flashed him a grin, while Natalie gave him a subtle thumbs up. "We did it," Micah whispered to himself, more to reassure his own nervous mind than anyone else. It wasn't just about winning in court, it was about the fact that people were listening now. The district might have tried to silence him, but it had only made him louder. The celebrations didn't last long. The district's lawyers had made it clear that they would be appealing the decision, and they had already begun to prepare their case for the next round. But in that moment, Micah allowed himself a brief moment of victory. The odds were still stacked against him, but he had proven something. His actions had made a difference, and they were forcing people to pay attention. That evening, as the news outlets picked up on the court's ruling, Micah sat in his room, scrolling through the messages flooding in on his phone. One by one, he read the supportive comments, the congratulations, the messages of solidarity. But there was one message that stood out from the rest. It was from his father, a message that was brief but full of pride. "I'm proud of you, son. You're doing something important. Keep fighting. You've already made history." Micah felt a lump form in his throat. It had been years since he had seen his father, and even longer since they had spoken about anything meaningful. To hear those words from him, words of pride, was a reminder of why he was doing this. It wasn't just for himself or for the movement, it was for everyone who had ever been told they couldn't make a difference. Micah closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of his father's words sink in. He had made history. But this was just the beginning. The next day, Ava met him at his house, and together, they gathered with a group of other students, activists, and supporters. They celebrated the small victory, but they also started to prepare for what was coming next. "Today is the first step," Ava said, standing at the front of the room. "We've made a dent in the system, but we still have a long way to go. The fight is far from over, but we've shown them we're not backing down." Micah nodded, his resolve strengthened. The district could try to appeal. They could try to shut him down. But now, they had no choice but to listen. And the movement? It was unstoppable. The victory was sweet, but Micah couldn't shake the feeling that it had only brought more trouble. He had known it wouldn't be easy, nothing worth fighting for ever was, but the pushback that followed the court ruling was fierce, more organized, and far-reaching than he could have imagined. A week after the court's decision, Micah was back at his high school, walking through the crowded hallways with a sense of unease hanging over him. He had returned to school, but the whispers in the halls, the stares, and the occasional muttered insults made it clear that he wasn't just the hero everyone had been praising. Now, he was the target. "Did you hear Micah got a court ruling? That's pretty crazy." "Yeah, but he's gonna get expelled, right? It's just a matter of time. Who does he think he is, getting the whole district riled up like this?" The comments came from all directions. Micah kept his head down as he made his way to class, trying not to let it get to him. The movement he had started had inspired so many people, but it had also made him enemies, and not just in the district. There were teachers who were quietly disapproving, classmates who resented him, and parents who didn't want their children getting involved in something so controversial. But the biggest threat came from the school district itself. In a public statement issued just days after the court ruling, the district's superintendent, Dr. Kevin Marks, had made it clear that the fight wasn't over. He called the court's decision a temporary setback and promised that the district would continue to push for disciplinary action against Micah. The superintendent also stated that the ruling would have dangerous consequences if allowed to stand, suggesting that it could lead to unruly behavior spreading to other schools. "We will not allow this kind of disrespect to undermine the authority of our schools," Dr. Marks had said during the press conference, his tone stern and uncompromising. Micah Davis's actions were disruptive, and they will not be tolerated. The district wasn't just fighting back legally, they were engaging in a full-fledged smear campaign. News outlets began reporting about Micah's radicalization, using words like troublemaker and agitator to paint him in a negative light. Articles online questioned his motives and even suggested that he was being manipulated by outside groups with agendas of their own. Some even insinuated that he was using the movement for personal gain, a notion that stung, considering how much he had risked to fight for the cause. Natalie, his lawyer, had warned him that the district would take these steps. They would try to discredit him, undermine his credibility, and make the public see him as nothing more than a troublemaker. But it was hard to watch it unfold. Each new headline felt like a blow to the hard work he and his supporters had put in. The accusations were growing louder, and the pressure was mounting. "Do you want to talk about it?" Ava asked one evening, after seeing him staring at his phone, a mix of frustration and exhaustion etched across his face. "I don't know what to say anymore," Micah replied, putting the phone down and rubbing his eyes. "It's like they're trying to destroy everything we've built. It's not just about me anymore. It's about everything I'm standing for." Ava sat down beside him. "I know, Micah. But you've got to stay focused. You can't let them win by making you feel small." Micah nodded, but he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. He had never asked for this kind of attention. He had never wanted to be the face of a movement, yet here he was, forced to carry the mantle of something much bigger than himself. And with that came an impossible amount of scrutiny. It wasn't just the media or the district anymore. Micah started receiving personal threats. It started small, random DMs on social media, vague comments about what would happen if he kept pushing. But soon, it escalated. Someone posted an anonymous message on a popular online forum: "Micah Davis should be kicked out of school permanently. He doesn't belong in a classroom. He's a danger to everyone around him." The threats made Micah nervous, but they also hardened his resolve. They were trying to intimidate him, trying to scare him into silence, but he wasn't backing down. This was bigger than any personal attack. They were trying to suppress a voice that had been speaking truth to power. "Don't let them get to you," Ava said, offering him a reassuring smile. "What you're doing is important, Micah. You have a lot of people who believe in you. You're not alone in this." Micah appreciated her support, but the days that followed were the hardest yet. His classmates grew more hostile. Even teachers who had once seemed supportive were now distant, wary of getting too involved. It wasn't long before Micah began to feel the weight of isolation. He was starting to wonder if it had been worth it. Despite the personal toll, the external pressure was growing in other ways, too. The district had started to rally its own forces, gathering support from local community leaders and conservative groups. These groups began to organize their own counter-rallies, with signs calling for Micah's expulsion and accusing him of attempting to tear apart the school system. The movement was more divided than ever, but Micah refused to let that break him. He knew what he was doing was right, and that conviction was what kept him going, even as the world around him seemed to turn against him. The pressure came to a head one morning when Micah arrived at school to find a crowd of protesters outside, holding signs and chanting slogans against him. They had gathered in response to a planned school board meeting where the district would discuss his case, and they were determined to make their voices heard. Micah stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching the protesters. His heart pounded, and for a split second, he thought about turning around and going home. But then he remembered why he was doing this, why it was worth all the pain, all the uncertainty. He couldn't back down. Not now. Taking a deep breath, he walked forward, past the protesters, and into the school. The whispers and stares followed him every step of the way, but he kept his head high. He wasn't going to let them make him feel small. He wasn't going to let them make him doubt himself. As he entered the school, he was greeted by a familiar face. It was Tyler, one of his closest friends and an outspoken supporter of the movement. "Are you okay?" Tyler asked quietly, falling in step beside him. Micah looked at him, meeting his gaze with determination. "Yeah. I'm fine. We've come too far to stop now." Tyler nodded. "I'm with you. We all are." Micah smiled, grateful for his friend's unwavering support. He wasn't alone in this fight, not now, not ever. Later that day, the school board meeting began. The room was filled with parents, teachers, and students, all eager to hear what would happen next. Micah sat in the front row, his lawyer by his side, as the board members took their seats. Dr. Mark stood up, addressing the crowd with his usual authoritative tone. "We are here today to discuss the actions of Micah Davis, a student who has openly defied the rules of our district and caused significant disruption. We believe that his actions pose a threat to the stability of our school system." Micah's heart raced. The fight was far from over. But in that moment, as he looked around the room and saw the faces of those who had stood with him, he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't backing down. The weeks following the school board meeting were the longest of Micah's life. The district had decided to escalate the fight, launching an all-out campaign against him. They weren't just going after his case. They were trying to discredit everything he stood for. And the pressure was mounting. At school, the atmosphere had become unbearable. Students who had once been friendly now avoided him, whispering behind his back or glaring at him in the hallways. The district had successfully painted him as a troublemaker, a radical who was threatening the stability of the education system. Even the teachers seemed divided. Some were quietly supportive, but others had begun to distance themselves, afraid of the consequences of standing up for him. Micah had become a pariah in his own school. But he couldn't let it break him. Not now. He had come too far, and the stakes were too high. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling day, Micah sat in the library, alone at a table in the back corner. He was surrounded by his books and notes, but his mind was far from his studies. His thoughts kept circling back to the same questions: was it worth it? Was all the pain, all the isolation, really going to lead to something meaningful? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his reverie. It was a message from Ava. "We need to talk. Meet me after school at the park." Micah felt a wave of relief. Ava had become his closest ally throughout all of this. She understood what he was going through in a way no one else could. She was the one person who could remind him of why he started this fight in the first place. He quickly packed up his things and headed out of the school building. Outside, the protesters were back again, holding their signs and chanting slogans. Micah tried to ignore them as he walked past, but he couldn't help noticing the angry faces staring back at him. It felt like the whole world was against him. The park was just a short walk from school, and as Micah approached, he saw Ava sitting on one of the benches, her eyes scanning the horizon as she waited for him. She stood up when she saw him coming, her expression serious but warm. "Hey," she said quietly, offering him a small smile. "I know things are rough right now, but you've been doing great. We're making a difference." Micah sat down beside her, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Every day it feels like the walls are closing in. I've lost so much, friends, teachers, people who were on my side. It's like I'm fighting a battle I can't win. Ava leaned back on the bench, her eyes focused on the trees swaying in the wind. I get it. It's not easy. But that's what they want. They want you to give up, to feel like you're all alone in this. But you're not. You've got people who are with you, who believe in what you're doing. I don't know anymore, Micah muttered. I keep thinking about everything I've sacrificed. What if it's all for nothing? Ava turned to him, her gaze unwavering. Micah, you've already accomplished so much. You've inspired people. You've sparked a conversation that no one else had the guts to start. The district can try to silence you, but they can't take away what you've done. You've made history. Micah let out a deep breath, trying to absorb her words. He knew she was right, but the pressure was overwhelming. The district wasn't just trying to silence him, they were trying to break his spirit. And with every passing day, it felt like they were succeeding. The next morning, the district upped the ante. A letter was sent home to all parents, warning them about the disruptive behavior in the school and claiming that Micah's actions were setting a dangerous precedent. The letter urged parents to contact the school if they were concerned about their children's involvement in the movement. It was a thinly veiled attempt to turn the community against him. Micah felt the weight of that letter like a physical blow. His parents were already under enough stress from his decision to stand up to the system. How would they react now, knowing that the district was targeting their own son? That afternoon, Micah sat at the kitchen table, his parents across from him. The silence between them was heavy, thick with tension. Finally, his mom spoke, her voice soft but filled with concern. Micah, we need to talk about this letter, she said, holding up the piece of paper that had arrived in the mail. The district is painting you in a really bad light. People are already talking. Micah clenched his fists, fighting the urge to shout. I know, Mom. But I can't stop. I can't just let them win. His dad, who had been silent up until then, finally spoke up. I understand that, son. But you've got to realize that this isn't just about you anymore. It's about all of us, our family, your future. We have to think carefully about what comes next. Micah looked at his father, feeling a pang of guilt. His parents had always been supportive, but this felt different. They were scared. And he couldn't blame them. I get it. I do. But if I back down now, it's like everything I've done has been for nothing, Micah said, his voice shaking with emotion. And if I don't fight for what's right, who will? His mother sighed, shaking her head. We're not saying you should stop, Micah. We just want you to understand the consequences of your actions. You're challenging the system, and systems don't like being challenged. You're going to face a lot more than just bad press. You're going to face people who will do whatever it takes to stop you. Micah felt the weight of their words, but something inside him refused to back down. He had already sacrificed so much. He wasn't going to quit now. I know the risks, he said, his voice steady now. But I have to do this. It's bigger than me. It's about every kid who feels like they don't have a voice. It's about making sure the system changes. His parents exchanged a look, then nodded slowly. We'll support you, his dad said quietly. But you need to be prepared for what's coming. It's going to get harder before it gets better. Micah nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. It wasn't the reassurance he had hoped for, but it was enough. He wasn't in this fight alone, even if it sometimes felt that way. That afternoon, Micah sat in his room, looking at the messages flooding his phone. His supporters were still out there, still fighting with him. Ava had organized a meeting for the next evening to plan the next steps in their campaign, and Micah knew that it was time to take things up a notch. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. It had been days since Micah's conversation with his parents, and though the tension at home remained, something had shifted inside him. He wasn't just fighting for his own freedom anymore. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point to those who had doubted him. No, it was bigger than that. This fight was for everyone, every student who felt powerless, every voice that had been silenced by an oppressive system, and every person who believed that real change was possible. Micah stood in front of his mirror that morning, adjusting his shirt as he prepared for the day. It was the first time in weeks that he felt a spark of hope. There was something in the air, something shifting. He had no way of knowing it yet, but the tide was turning in his favor. At school, the mood had shifted slightly. The protests that had once been aimed directly at him were starting to lose their steam. Sure, there were still students who rallied against him, still a vocal minority who believed he was a threat to their way of life. But more and more, those voices were being drowned out by others who were beginning to ask questions. What if Micah was right? What if the system needed to change? The change started small, in little moments. One by one, students who had once been on the fence began to reach out to Micah, offering their support. Some sent him messages of encouragement, others quietly spoke up in class, voicing their agreement with his ideas. It was like a ripple effect. The silence from the majority of students had been broken. One afternoon, Micah sat down with Ava in the school's courtyard. They were taking a brief break between classes, surrounded by the sound of chatter and laughter. But it wasn't just the usual high school noise today. There was an unfamiliar energy in the air, and Micah could feel it. Things are changing, Ava said, glancing around as she spoke. I've been getting messages from students who want to help. They're tired of being quiet. Micah raised an eyebrow, surprised. Seriously? After everything that's happened? Ava nodded. Yeah. It's like the more the district pushes back, the more people start to question what they're really doing. People are seeing the bigger picture now. Micah thought about it for a moment. There was no denying that the district's attempts to silence him had only made him more determined. But he hadn't realized that it was also making others see the truth. It wasn't just about him anymore. The fight for his right to speak out had become a symbol for the larger struggle for justice and fairness in the school system. I never thought I'd be here, Micah said quietly. I didn't think I'd make it this far. Ava smiled. You didn't just make it this far, Micah. You've changed things. You've inspired people to think differently. Micah was silent for a moment, processing her words. He still couldn't believe it, how quickly everything had escalated. One simple act of questioning authority, and now he was at the center of a movement. Do you think it's enough? He asked, his voice uncertain. Ava met his gaze, her eyes filled with conviction. You've already made history. But we still have a long way to go. You have a platform now, Micah. It's time to use it. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Ava organized another meeting, this time with a larger group of students who had come to Micah's side. There was a sense of urgency in the air, as if everyone knew that the movement had reached a critical point. The district had underestimated the power of the students, and now they were beginning to feel the weight of their own overreach. As Micah stood at the front of the group, looking at the faces of his fellow students, he realized just how much things had changed. There were people in this room who had once stood on the sidelines, unsure of what to think. But now, they were here, ready to stand with him, ready to push back against the forces that had tried to silence them all. We have to keep pushing, Micah said, his voice steady and filled with resolve. The district is trying to tear us apart, but we can't let them win. We have the power to change things, but only if we stand together. The room buzzed with energy, a feeling of solidarity that Micah hadn't expected. These weren't just his friends or supporters, they were his comrades in a battle for something far bigger than any one person. This was about creating a future where students had a voice, where the system wasn't allowed to crush them under its weight. They talked about the next steps. Organizing a student-led rally, launching an awareness campaign on social media, and making sure that the district knew they weren't going to back down. It wasn't just about fighting the district anymore, it was about reclaiming their agency, their voices, and their futures. The day of the rally arrived, and Micah stood at the front of a crowd of students, teachers, and even some parents who had joined the movement. The energy was palpable, and Micah could feel the power of it in his bones. This wasn't just a protest, it was a declaration. A declaration that they would not be silenced. The district had tried to shut them down at every turn. But now, with the support of the student body and the wider community, Micah knew that they couldn't ignore them anymore. The movement had reached critical mass. Micah stepped up to the microphone, his heart racing as he looked out at the sea of faces. This was it, the moment he had been fighting for. He took a deep breath, his voice steady as he spoke. This isn't just about me. This is about all of us. We are the future of this school, of this district, and we will not be silenced. We have a right to be heard, and we will not let anyone take that away from us. The crowd erupted in cheers, the sound echoing through the school grounds. Micah's heart swelled with pride, knowing that he was part of something bigger than himself. This wasn't just a victory for him, it was a victory for every student who had ever felt powerless. And in that moment, Micah knew that the tide had truly turned. The district could fight back all they wanted, but they would never be able to stop the wave of change that was coming. Micah stood outside the district office, staring up at the towering building. His heart raced with a mix of anticipation and dread. Today was the day. The day he would face the full force of the system that had tried to silence him, the system that had fought so hard to crush everything he had worked for. He wasn't just walking into that building for himself anymore, he was doing it for every student who had ever felt invisible, for every teacher who had been too afraid to speak up, for every person who believed that change was possible. It had been a long journey, filled with highs and lows, triumphs and setbacks. But here he was, standing on the brink of a new chapter. Whether or not he would be able to change the system was still uncertain, but he had already succeeded in one thing. He had proven that a single voice, no matter how small, could make a difference. Ava walked up beside him, her presence a steadying force. "You ready for this?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Micah nodded, taking a deep breath. "Ready as I'll ever be. Let's do this." They entered the building together, walking through the glass doors and up to the receptionist's desk. Micah's pulse quickened as they were escorted to the conference room, where a long table was set up, with several district officials sitting on the other side, their faces stoic and unreadable. The tension in the air was palpable. Micah took his seat at the head of the table, facing off against the very people who had tried to destroy his future. He felt the weight of their gazes, but he didn't flinch. This was his moment. This was the culmination of everything he had fought for. The superintendent, a tall, imposing figure named Mr. Walters, was the first to speak. "Micah Davis," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "I hope you understand the gravity of this situation. Your actions have caused a great deal of disruption in our district. This is your last chance to reconsider your position before we take further action." Micah held his ground, his voice steady as he replied, "I understand the gravity, Mr. Walters. But I also understand that what you're doing to the students here is far more dangerous than anything I've ever done. You've been silencing voices, suppressing ideas, and crushing the very spirit of education. That's why I'm here today, to make sure that it stops." A murmur ran through the room as Micah's words hung in the air. The district officials exchanged glances, their unease barely masked. "You're just a student," one of the board members, Mrs. Stevens, chimed in, her tone dismissive. "What do you think you can change? The system has been in place for years. It's not going to bend to the will of one teenager." Micah leaned forward, his voice rising with conviction. "I'm not just one teenager. I'm the voice of hundreds of students who feel ignored, unheard, and oppressed. And I'm not going to back down until the system starts listening to us." Another official, Mr. Harris, shifted in his seat. "You've already caused enough chaos. We've had to deal with protests, social media campaigns, and negative press. This is damaging the reputation of our district. How do you propose we fix that? By changing the way you think about education, Micah said, his eyes burning with passion. You don't care about the students. You care about maintaining control. But education isn't about control. It's about empowering students, giving them the tools they need to succeed, and allowing them to think critically and challenge the status quo. You're failing us by not seeing that. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of Micah's words hanging in the air. He could see the doubt creeping into the eyes of some of the officials, the cracks forming in their carefully constructed facade. They weren't used to being challenged like this, not by someone so young. Mr. Walters cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. This is a waste of time, Micah. We've given you multiple opportunities to back down, and you've refused. We're prepared to take legal action if necessary. Micah's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't back down. You can try. But you won't win. Not anymore. Not when there are people behind me, students, parents, teachers, who want change. The tide has already turned. And no matter what you do, you can't stop it. There was a long pause, and for the first time since this fight began, Micah saw fear in their eyes. Not just fear of him, but fear of what he represented. He was no longer just a student causing a ruckus. He had become the embodiment of something far more powerful, a movement for change, for justice, for a better future. We can't let this go on forever, Mrs. Stevens said, her voice trembling slightly. You're right about one thing, Micah. The system is broken. But changing it is going to take more than just protesting. It will take years of work, and a lot of compromise. We can't just let every student walk in here and demand change on a whim. Micah shook his head, his voice calm but firm. I'm not asking for compromise. I'm asking for accountability. I'm asking for a system that works for everyone, not just the ones in power. If you really care about the students, you'll listen to us. You'll take our concerns seriously. And you'll work with us to make real change happen. The tension in the room was thick, but Micah could feel the walls beginning to crumble. The district officials didn't have the power they once did. They couldn't just dismiss him as a troublemaker anymore. He had proven that. And he was ready to keep pushing until the change he sought was not only acknowledged but enacted. Mr. Walters looked at his colleagues, his expression hard. After a moment of silence, he sighed deeply. We'll take your concerns under advisement. But don't think for a second that this fight is over. We'll be watching you, Micah. Micah stood up, his body tense with the weight of the moment. I don't expect you to make changes overnight. But just know this, you can't stop a movement whose time has come. As he turned to leave the room, he could hear the faint murmur of the officials behind him, their voices no longer filled with the same arrogance they had once had. He had done it. He had won. Micah walked out of the district office, the weight of the day lifting off his shoulders. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain, he had made a difference. And no matter how the district tried to fight back, they couldn't ignore him anymore. The power of the students had been awakened. The days that followed the showdown at the district office were a blur. Micah had expected some immediate backlash, perhaps even a continued battle in the courts. But something unexpected happened. The district, for the first time in a long while, seemed to pause. They didn't fire back with the force they had before. No more threats of legal action. No more dismissals. No more shutting him down. Micah couldn't shake the feeling that the district was still processing what had happened, that they were unsure of how to respond to the wave of change that had begun. And he, in the middle of it all, felt both exhilarated and exhausted. One evening, as Micah sat in his room, he found himself scrolling through social media. The hashtag Micah Davis movement had started trending. It wasn't just students from his high school either, it was gaining traction in other schools across the country. News outlets picked up the story, interviews flooded in, and soon, Micah became a symbol of resilience for thousands of young people. The more the district tried to ignore him, the more the movement grew. Ava, who had been his closest ally throughout this journey, had been right. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was bigger than any one person. It was about the future of education, about giving students a voice in the decisions that shaped their lives. But despite all the attention, Micah knew that there was still much work to be done. The battle wasn't over, it had just begun. A week later, Micah was invited to speak at a national student leadership conference. The invitation came with a sense of urgency. The organizers had heard his story, and they believed that his voice was one that needed to be heard on a larger stage. Micah, who had never imagined himself as a public figure, was now standing at the forefront of a movement. Micah Davis, the host, introduced him, her voice filled with anticipation. A student who dared to question authority and sparked a revolution in education. The applause that followed was thunderous. It wasn't just admiration for his courage, it was an acknowledgement of the change he had helped create. Micah took a deep breath as he walked to the podium, the weight of the moment sinking in. He could feel the eyes of hundreds of students, educators, and leaders watching him. This wasn't just another speech. This was the culmination of everything he had fought for, the chance to speak for those who had been ignored, to inspire the change he believed in. "I've spent the last few months fighting to be heard," Micah began, his voice steady but passionate. "But the truth is, it's not about me. It never was. It's about every student who has ever felt like their voice didn't matter. It's about every teacher who has been forced to toe the line, to teach a curriculum that doesn't reflect the needs of their students. It's about creating a system where every person is valued, where every idea is heard." The crowd was silent, hanging on to every word he spoke. "We've been told for so long that we're too young to make a difference, that we don't know what we're talking about. But we do. We understand the challenges we face. We understand the system that's been put in place. And we know that change is possible. But it starts with us." Micah paused, scanning the room, locking eyes with students from across the country. He could feel the energy in the room shift, the collective spark of hope beginning to rise. "Change doesn't happen by waiting for someone else to do it," he continued. "It happens when we decide we're not going to take no for an answer. It happens when we come together and demand to be heard. And it starts right here, right now." The applause that erupted in the room was deafening, but it wasn't just applause for Micah. It was applause for the movement he had ignited. It was applause for every student who had ever felt powerless. It was applause for a new beginning. In the weeks that followed, Micah's life changed in ways he had never anticipated. He was contacted by various organizations, universities, and even politicians who wanted to hear his perspective on education reform. He was offered scholarships, speaking engagements, and opportunities to collaborate with other young leaders. It was overwhelming, but it was also exactly what he had fought for. But amidst the whirlwind of attention, Micah remained grounded. He never lost sight of what had truly mattered, the change he wanted to see in the world, the lives he wanted to impact, and the voices he wanted to amplify. His mission had always been about more than personal recognition. It had been about creating a space for others to step into their own power. He returned to his high school, not as the student who had been kicked out, but as a leader who had helped reshape the future of education. The district, facing mounting pressure from the public and from the students themselves, had no choice but to begin re-evaluating its policies. In the months that followed, reforms were implemented in his school district. New programs were introduced that allowed students to voice their concerns directly to school boards. The curriculum was updated to include more diverse perspectives. And, most importantly, students were given a seat at the table when decisions were made about their education. Micah had become the spark, but it was the collective efforts of students, teachers, and families that fueled the fire of change. One evening, Micah sat down with his parents, who had been watching his journey unfold with a mixture of pride and awe. They had been worried at first, unsure of how his fight would play out. But now, as they saw the impact he had made, they couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration for their son. You did it, his mother said softly, her voice filled with pride. You changed everything. Micah smiled, feeling the weight of everything he had accomplished. But he knew that the change was just beginning. There was still so much work to be done. I didn't do it alone, he said. And this is just the start. As Micah looked out of the window that night, he knew that his fight had made a difference. But he also knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger journey. He had ignited a fire that would continue to burn, sparking change in schools and communities across the country. The world was changing, and Micah Davis was at the heart of it. And this time, no one could ignore him. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?